How will employers respond when office work is safe again? Will we snap back into our 9 to 5 office hours, or is remote work here to stay? We've all been thrown into remote work culture, but we're lucky to have some people today who've been living in this world for years. Predicting the future is not easy for anyone, but if anyone can do it, it's these panelists. We're lucky to have Brianne Kimmel, the managing partner at WorkLife, Alyssa Rossi, the head of growth at Remote, Maulud Cicerelli, the CEO and founder of Remote Forever, and David Darmanian, the founder and CEO of Hotjar. This is going to be a really interesting panel for me to learn a lot, and hopefully everyone on the call. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. Excited for this conversation. First off, let's hear a little bit about each of the panelists and what got you into the remote work world. Starting with Brianne.
It's been interesting to see throughout, the evolution of my career, working at a big company like Expedia and seeing to what extent, can you have really meaningful coordination across different time zones, across different teams. After Expedia, I was at Zendesk, which started, essentially 3 Danish founders moved to Silicon Valley, an amazing startup success story. While I was there, we scaled from 1 to many products, and many of those products were in different time zones and in different countries. And so, how do you maintain coordination and think about building and scaling culture very effectively? Zendesk has always had a really amazing culture, very, very philanthropic in nature. And how do you actually think about volunteering in different regions, or thinking about diversity and inclusion as you scale into new markets as well. And now, most recently, I left Zendesk to start a future of work focused firm called WorkLife. We've made a number of investments in tools for remote teams, remote productivity, a lot of developer-friendly infrastructure. And so remote is something I think about every day. Now, from the perspective of 100% fully distributed teams from day one. And so it's been really interesting to think about hiring and culture and what it takes even operationally to really get teams aligned from day one and to facilitate all of these changes that have happened pretty significantly over the past few months.
Great to have you, Brianne. Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. This is Elisa Rossi. I'm the head of growth at Remote. And so Remote is my 5th startup in 10 years. And every company I worked at had something to do with international expansion. I was usually on the international operations side of things or international product marketing. So I was always responsible for scaling the team internationally, which means a ton of remote work, a ton of challenges. And so in a way, I've been kind of a pioneer of this. And then when I met Job, the CEO of Remote, only, in January, so that was pre-COVID, and I saw what he was doing, I was like, I'm sold. This is the problem that we need to solve for the future of work. And at Remote, what we do essentially, we help companies of any size build a global team, be it an international contractor or an international full-time employee. We provide the tools for international payroll, tax, benefits, and compliance, so that anyone can hire a global team anywhere.
Great, thank you. Maulud.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maulud. I'm the founder of Remote Forever, and I work as a remote work expert consultant and agile coach for distributed companies that are transforming to agile ways of working. I stumbled upon remote working in the very first job I had, and I actually struggled to find a team that was completely co-located. So my entire career has been remote. And I worked as a software developer, I worked as a software tester, I worked as a software security engineer, and slowly found my way into the world of Agile. And I worked as a Scrum Master and product owner, and mostly as an Agile coach. And what brought me into this world and what led me to create Remote Forever was basically the fact that every single team and every single company I was a part of was distributed, but the Agile industry, the Agile movement as a whole, had thought leaders that insisted on co-location, and they even thought that business agility was impossible if the teams and companies were not co-located. So I started Remote Forever Summit as the beginning of this whole Remote Forever movement, and the next edition of Remote Forever Summit is actually on November 11th this year, and it's obviously free. And here I am with you, helping you and other companies with Agile and Remote coming together.
Thanks, Maulud. And David.
Hi, David. I'm the CEO and founder of Hotjar. I actually got into remote work before Hotjar. So that was 2012. I was born in Australia, but my parents moved back to Malta. Malta's a tiny island in the Mediterranean. And yeah, I was an executive back in 2012, and it was very difficult in a software company in Malta. It was very difficult to find people that were willing to relocate here to scale up the business. I knew I wanted to have a business of my own at some point, so I really wanted to embrace a different lifestyle. So I took the plunge and I started working remote. Come 2014, when I founded Hotjar, we decided we would be completely distributed from day one. So despite the founders all being in Malta, we were all wearing headsets from day one, a few kilometers away from each other. And since then, we've never looked back. For us, there's never been any other option. And everything we've done, everything we've built, and how we've scaled and designed the business has been around a distributed model, not just our location, but how we operate. And yeah, we've heard a lot of naysayers and people saying this is not a good idea and we don't invest in remote businesses and you're not going to do well, but it's worked really well for us. So looking forward to talking about how the panel sees the future of distributed.
Lud, maybe you can kick us off. Can you explain the difference between work from home and work from anywhere? And what's going to be more common? Is one of them going to be the dominant form and one's a minority, or are we going to see a blend of both?
I love that question. Thank you for inviting me to talk about that. It's a passion of mine to actually distinguish between working from home in the middle of a health crisis compared to the freedom that remote work can provide for working from anywhere that you're most productive. So I think that remote work is in essence about freedom. It's about giving every single individual the possibility to work from any location they feel that they're more productive and they can contribute the most. And a lot of companies are struggling with providing the infrastructure, the processes, the support system that individuals need in order to be productive. And sometimes people think that remote work is about having no office and not being allowed to mingle with your co-workers in person. So what I think the future will bring us is really dependent on the vaccine, because we're in the middle of a global health crisis, and a lot of people are forced to work from home. And the experience that they're getting of remote work is only that, which is so the opposite of freedom that remote work is supposed to provide. So I want to make that super clear that we are not going to work from home forever if there is a vaccine. But because now everyone has experienced one version of working from home, it becomes so much easier for thought leaders, for company leaders to provide that infrastructure and support system so that people can work from anywhere they feel that they are most productive.
And David, how does remote first fit in this work from home, work from anywhere paradigm?
Yeah, I actually have this, I discussed this topic quite a lot, especially with either companies that are looking to pivot, as you can imagine, that's accelerated over the last few months, or young startups that are kind of at a fork in the road, right? They're saying, what do we do? Do we go remote or not? I actually get to speak to quite a few CEOs about this. And I think really it's about what I said, right? It's about co-founders with headsets in Malta, a few kilometers away from each other, but we're always joining calls in a distributed way. It's thinking at its DNA, at its values level of thinking, how do we work in a distributed way? So to me, that is what being distributed first is. It's not about it's not just about processes and structure, which are incredibly important, but I think it really comes back to values. So for us, for example, one of the most important values in our success, we believe, of scaling successfully a distributed business, so we're 120 people across 24 countries now, has been trust. So trust is a really, really important value to us, especially trust that comes through transparency. So operating in this way has really allowed us to function in this way, and it's just the way that the business has been operating. Then if we look beyond that in the way that we put that into effect, so everyone who joins the company is welcomed as if they walked into an office. They receive a credit card. They receive allowances and budgets. We give them responsibility and ownership. So it's truly distributed, not just in terms of location. So when we think about distributed first, it's about thinking, not comparing to how do we replicate a location-based business into remote. It's about how do we distribute the function of the organization to the teams doing the work, right, at the front line, and we are only there to enable them and make it possible for them to do amazing work.
So, Brianne, could you tell me two things? Could you tell me, one, what kind of, David mentioned organizational values or culture. What kind of company cultures and values are necessary if companies want to become remote first, move into that this new trend? And secondly, I'd love your opinion on, is this going to be a small, tiny trend, or is this going to be a majority of firms in 5 years? What's your take on the vector size here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what's interesting is we're now many months into this new era of, essentially fully remote work. And so, the first few months of COVID, it was interesting to see, this immediate shift where companies of all sizes and stages were investing in new tools. They were getting documentation in a good place. And, a lot of that critical and foundational work has already been set and is in place. And so moving forward, it feels like flexibility is the only path moving forward. So we already have all the tools. We already have documentation in place. We're, both personally and professionally, getting used to this new era of working from home and working in a more flexible nature. And so what's interesting and what I think about a lot is, whether you're a company that's just getting an idea off the ground, you're a startup that's validating an idea, you're a startup that's starting to experiment, like increased capital efficiency that comes from not having real estate costs and from, leveraging global talent and building a team that's not reliant on, a more expensive ecosystem like Silicon Valley. We're already starting to see in the short term that there are real competitive advantages to building fully distributed engineering teams and removing real estate costs and sort of investing in a new type of culture. And so the way that I think about culture today and what's changed sort of pre and post COVID is now one of the luxuries is actually the ability of having more time at home with your family. And so I think when we've removed a commute, when we've removed the expectation that you have to join company happy hours, I'm hearing especially from new parents and moms in particular that, this new style of working in the short term, it is very painful because a lot of people are without childcare. And there's this sort of like, work and life is now one because we're essentially at home. But, post COVID and when things start to go back to a level of normal, what's awesome is that now there's less of an expectation around forced company culture. And it's more about flexibility and how do you actually find a lifestyle and sort of design your life in a way where you do have more flexibility and more of an opportunity to be creative. I'll give a very tangible example. I'm an angel investor in a company called Webflow. Webflow I would say, has some of the most progressive remote benefits. And this was prior to COVID as well, where I think burnout is something that a lot of companies are starting to diagnose and watch and monitor and really build programs around. And so actually giving employees the ability to not only take vacation, but actually paying them to take that vacation as an incentive is really great. And so that's something that Webflow offers. Another thing that companies are thinking about is, should you reallocate commuter benefits and actually assign that to designing your home office? Like companies are saving a lot of money right now. There's lower real estate costs. There's not an expectation around free lunches. And so, it does make sense to reallocate some of that spend and really build a really awesome remote culture, which remote culture ends up looking like a new desk, maybe a little bit of home renovations. And some of these new employer funded programs are really interesting because in the short term, they look a lot more like hobbies and personal interests, but they do really help you build a strong, fully remote culture. And so there's a lot of interesting things where it's kind of like, now that people are working from home, a lot of the things that we do in our free time more personally actually impact our overall well-being. And culture is less about happy hours, but it's more about, finding your own productivity and coming up with creative and thoughtful ways to give back to individual teammates.
Thank you. And Alyssa, some big companies like Facebook and Microsoft and Google have announced plans for more continued remote work and more flexibility. What are some things companies need to consider before making this kind of announcement? And also tapping into a question in the Slido, how can people start the conversation in these large companies or traditional office-first companies to move in that direction?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start with the question because, as you can imagine, we've seen a very significant surge in demand remote, but many companies reach out to us really not having internalized what it means to be remote first or remote. What does it mean to work from home versus work from anywhere? And I think the first question for us is, are you really a remote first company if there are geographical boundaries to your ability to employ people anywhere they may want to live? Because ultimately it's about freedom. It's about living anywhere you want to live, close to your family, close to your aging parents, close to your support system. And so what needs to be built is support for both cross-state and cross-country relocations. This is very important, as well as for digital nomads, right? Folks who want to be in Mexico for a month and then go to Costa Rica or Germany. And this is done through a combination of HR, legal, and operational infrastructure. So you can offer international payroll, tax benefits, and compliance in multiple countries, as well as a very strong remote culture, which is another thing that's too often taken for granted, but it's everything. It's critical. It's the key to remote work actually working. And again, like in terms of remote work culture, we could talk about this for hours probably, but we have a really incredible handbook with best practices at remote.com that you should go check out. And then in terms of what to consider, right, when you make announcements, right, that you're going all remote or remote first, for me, joining remote was getting a chance at shaping the future of work. And so this is something we think about all the time. We don't get a chance at starting over very often. And now we have a clean slate at defining what we want this new chapter of the workplace to look like. And we need to do our very best to build the infrastructure for this. And so I think in order to make a change in terms of creating a workplace where anyone can thrive, we can do it in two ways. Well, number one, there's a very clear diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda that we need to consider, right? So while we heard reports from, for example, female CEOs saying that the screen sitting in between them and the investors feels like an equalizer as they work fundraising, right? But even then, remote work, it can be a double-edged sword. Since we don't meet people in person when interviewing, we may fall into the trap of, simply picking people who sound and look more like us, and that might just perpetuate the challenge. So we can't let our guards down. We need to make sure that the diversity, equity, and inclusion remains front and center in every company's hiring effort. Now, with remote work, more than ever. And then secondly, benefits, right? So Brian touched upon this. It's critical. And this is really probably one of the most impactful and significant projects we're working on right now at Remote. The benefits packages pre-COVID and post-COVID will not be the same. And this is, I think we all agree on this. There needs to be remote work focused benefits, family focused benefits, wellness focused benefits, social life focused benefits, right? Recognizing that mental health is a very important component of a benefits package. And this is an integral part of remote work and of the future of work, right? To make sure that our employees are actually thriving and they're attracted and retained. I would say that our global benefits offerings is perhaps one of the most ambitious and impactful products. And the question is, how do we design a best-in-class benefits package for distributed employees in every country? This is a wonderful challenge, and I encourage everyone to join the conversation with us.
Great. So we've got an overview so far of different kinds of remote work, from flexibility, work from home, work from anywhere, and remote first. We've also described a bunch of benefits and challenges, including benefits themselves, the logistical side of relocation, the cultural element, It sounds like we're pretty on board with this remote work thing. Let me be the devil's advocate, and I want to hear what you guys say. When I look at the announcements of Google, Microsoft, Facebook, I don't hear them saying we're going to make our most important engineering and product development teams remote first. What would you say to people who say, hey, remote's great for a lot of the business, but for teams who really have to innovate, who really have to adapt and work closely, it's not going to work, or they're going to be outcompeted by local teams who are doing that? Who would like to respond to that scary challenge? Please, Maulud, and then Alyssa.
All right, so I'm going to start with this myth that people often have when they are working remotely all of a sudden, who have never experienced working remotely before, and all they know of work and collaboration is being in the same room and talking over each other and brainstorming and communicating in real time. That is, I say something, you say something, another person says something, and we're all collaborating in real time. A fundament of working effectively, communicating effectively remotely, is to rely on more asynchronous ways of communication compared to synchronous ways of communication. So I want everybody to really understand that communication itself can be divided in two very different types. Synchronous, which is real time, it's chat, it's talking, it's online meetings or in-person meetings, and asynchronous, which is the possibility, the ability to write things down, to create a video, to create images, to really work through your thought process and come up with a fully formed thought before you communicate it. And if we are able to do that, if we actually work in our culture, in our collaborative culture, we work through becoming really, really good at effective communication asynchronously, then our synchronous communications will magically become a lot better. Every time we meet, every time we collaborate in real time, it just goes super fast because everybody has already digested the information before they came to that synchronous meeting. So when companies are moving into this idea of remote working and they're not investing in learning how to create effectiveness in their communication processes, they are really missing the point. And I want to also emphasize on the fact that people communicate in order to collaborate. Communication on itself is not a goal. The goal is to actually collaborate and to create value for the customers. So if we miss that, we will fill our calendars with meeting after meeting after meeting because we kind of assume that communication is the end goal, but it's not. We need to see what is beyond that. What is the purpose of this communication? What are we getting out of that?
So you're saying that product development teams can work just as fast remotely as long as they build these asynchronous communication capacity. Alyssa, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. What Maulud said was perfect. There's a set of rules, right? There's a set of best practices around remote work. Everyone should familiarize with them before starting. And just reading through all of those best practices is already, debunking any myths around remote working not working for someone, be it because they believe the time zone is a challenge or because they think that some teams may need a different type of interaction. This can all be taken care of by really well-planned and thoughtful internal remote work culture. And also, I just want to add to this that I believe that, you can argue as much as you want, but the train has kind of left the station at this point. We at Remote, we conducted a study called the Global Workforce Report. Essentially, just jotted down a couple of numbers, but 81%, we surveyed companies, in the US and in the UK. 81% of tech workers say that they would move to a different state or country if they could do so without it affecting their employment. And 66% of companies in our study plan to increase these options for their employees. So what this means is that this is right now, right? Being able to provide the best, remote work benefits for your employees is the difference between winning the talent war and losing it, and winning in business and losing in business, right? It's how you attract and retain the best talent in the world. You want the best, product marketer, product manager, that amazing engineer who decided remote work is what they're going to do moving forward. They got a taste of that freedom, of the flexibility. They're not going back. So it's the key to attracting and retaining talent in the future.
Yeah, I
Brianna,
completely
David,
agree. I'll build on that. Yeah, I'll build on that a little bit more. I think it's really interesting to see, even in the short term, prior to COVID, there's been a lot of research done on the amount of time that's spent in meetings. And so I oftentimes think about this in terms of people who are breaking into tech, building a reputation like very early. And those are individuals that are, writing code, writing blog posts, like really just like demonstrating and building their reputation in the ecosystem. There's also this middle management layer that I think is really seeing the benefit of fewer meetings, asynchronous communications. Prior to COVID, there's been a lot of research, and consistently it's between 35 to 40% of a middle manager's week is spent in meetings. And so it's not the most effective use of time. And more importantly, the challenge when you spend a large percentage of your week in meetings is you don't actually get to perfect your craft at all. So you're not spending more time writing code. You're not spending more time, developing your own tone of voice and writing internal communications. And so the challenge is you end up spending a lot of your day in meetings defending your work rather than creating. And so I see the path moving forward is really, how do we work asynchronously? How do we work more collaboratively in a way where we're getting each day rather than spending more time in meetings defending our own capabilities? And so in the short term, I'm already seeing really great data to support that. When people work asynchronously, your work gets recognized, you get praised for the things that you're doing. In a lot of the, new productivity tools, you can give someone a thumbs up, you can give real-time feedback. Like there's just ways to actually get better as a person rather than sitting in meetings and defending your work and trying to make things happen. And so I think already we're seeing that it's producing a much better person that feels a lot more fulfilled, because if anything, there are new ways of getting recognized for your work rather than spending more time in meetings.
Another challenge I hear is culture, right? Hey, we know how to build culture. We actually don't know how to build culture. It just happens. But we know it happens when people are near each other, and then the magic occurs. So David, talk to me about building culture and onboarding people and all those the loose connections. I've read some research, people talking about lots of tight connections are communicating and remote, but the loose connections are gone. So this softer side of the game, how do you make that not a limiting factor in remote first?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on this because there's a quote that I heard once, which I really agree with, which is a CEO or a leader or a leadership team really can't control much when you think about it. If there's one thing they can control, it's culture. But if there's anything I would like to share today is we need to make a distinction between values, which are an input, and culture, which is an output, right? So no one sits down and says, let's create this culture, right? That doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So really, I think every organization, whether you're distributed or not, very early on need to think very thoroughly about what their values are and defining those, and for them to be action type of values, right? Not writing on the wall values. So we shall do this, we shall not do that, right? And then on the back of those values, make difficult decisions, because if you're not, then they're not really values. And those difficult decisions equal the culture, right? Because you can have values and then take no decisions, which means you have no control over your culture. I think, again, whether you're distributed or not, I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. Although I would say we've talked a little bit up to this point about the difference in terms of communication. So async, very, very important. It's been a huge impact on us. So it's the same principles apply, right? So now you're thinking about values asynchronously, right? So what does that mean? The importance of a culture book, the importance of giving examples, the importance of writing, right, about how values have determined decisions. These are incredibly important in a distributed environment.
Great, great. There's a question here that I'd like to think about. So we've talked about some models that work, models that don't work, or models to avoid. So someone's in the Slido has asked, does it only work if the entire company works remote? What if half the people go back to the office? Does it break down for everyone? And I've seen, is there seen some research saying that in a team which is mixed mode, we have some people in office, some people out of office. The in office people get promoted. The out of office people don't get promoted. The out of office people don't get listened to on Zoom and they forget they're there. Maybe that's old world thinking, and maybe it's changed now. But Maulud, can you let us know, are there mixed mode models to avoid, or do you think anything can work if it's got the right training and support?
I think I'd like to bring it back full circle, adding on top of what David just shared. When we're thinking about hybrid meetings or hybrid setups for companies that is part co-located and part distributed, we're actually talking about the next level challenge. So now we're going to think about all these companies that have been transforming to agile ways of working over the past 2 decades. And a lot of them started by scaling agile without even understanding how to do agile in one team or in one product. So I used to tell these people, before you scale agile, make sure you understand it and you can actually do it in a smaller scale. It's the same with remote. Before you try hybrid, make sure that you can actually work remotely, fully distributed. And when you go to this hybrid setup, you can also bring elements of fully distributed in order to take advantage of them so that you become more effective. An example of that is a team that is partly sitting in an office conference room having a meeting with a bunch of people that are sitting at home or sitting in a cafe and are completely remote from that location. What you can do is that people who are sitting in an office, they would naturally only turn on one camera and one microphone, and that's that of the conference room. What you can do is to bring those little bits of elements of fully distributed teams, which means turn on the camera on your laptop so that when you see those little squares of people's faces on the screen, everyone gets the same experience. In addition to that, you can definitely use the video of the conference room, right, to give that extra context to people so they can see that you are in the same room. Now, when you expand that to the culture of the company, it's the same thing. It's going back to what David said at the very beginning, creating a remote first culture. Creating a distributed first culture means you think or you assume that everybody is remote. And if it happens that some people are sitting together or are working from the same location, so be it. The default is that everybody is remote and everybody gets the possibility of the same benefits, the same experiences, the same way of being included in the way that the company works.
So you would agree that a mixed mode is not a great place to be. You want to be remote first, even if you happen to have in-office and out-of-office people, you still have to make that transition to a remote first culture. Anyone else got any ideas?
I don't think that it's bad, actually. I want to correct that. I didn't say that it's a bad way to be. I don't think that it's disadvantageous to have part in office and part remote. What I'm saying is learn how to be fully remote before you go to hybrid.
Yeah, so which for big companies is a massive journey and maybe one that they're not going to ever be successful at. So then if you're not going to be successful at it, then maybe you shouldn't do that. Would that be the implication? For large tech firms who aren't really great at changing, would you be advising them maybe think twice about moving to mixed mode if they can't invest in that agenda?
Definitely. They've been forced to work in fully distributed in this past months, right?
Right. Any other thoughts on what to avoid here? On traps for young players, maybe? On setups or structures that are non-ideal in your thinking?
I'll take a contrarian point of view on the office thing. I am both a firm believer that flexibility and remote work is great for a large percentage of people. I think it is a great way for you to structure your own day. It's a great way to work asynchronously and work more productively. There's also an aspect of having a physical location that can be a great equalizer. I think a lot about this specifically for individuals that are breaking into tech, who are fresh out of school, we're coming to an office and just having a collective of people in the same space where you take a lot of company pride, you want to participate in happy hours, you want to, just absorb as much as possible. And I think that's something where the hallway conversations or asking someone a quick question who sits next to you is a really important aspect of the transition from going to university or going to a coding boot camp or, progressing beyond a more academic and educational environment into the workforce. And so I think a lot about that. I think specifically with folks that are currently breaking into tech while, potentially living at home or living with their parents or in an environment that isn't quite the right learning experience or isn't quite as immersive as being in an office. And so I think that's something to consider in the short term. I also find in a lot of ways, having that physical space and inviting remote employees to come visit HQ is actually a really great retention lever for teams. I think bringing people together, having both in-person sessions and then going back to either working from home or working from a second or satellite office is a great way to really build culture and build trust. And so I think in the short term, yes, we're in a really awkward state globally. However, in the future, I can imagine hybrid models where even distributed teams will have the opportunity to meet up either booking an Airbnb or booking some sort of shared space. And I think having that sort of culture and tribalism essentially where you can come together, spend time, build trust, really hash out specific projects. I view that as being part of enabling flexible work where, I don't think the office is completely obsolete or something that we won't have in the future. I think if anything, there is still a purpose for having that space. And I think it's especially relevant for folks that are new and breaking into the industry who are a little bit younger, who need that sort of collectivism and having everyone in the same room. I also find it's nice for teams to come together and build trust where, these conversations are great, but we should also think of other ways. This is just one. I think there are additional modes that are more immersive and that actually bring people together in the same space.
So coming together to align, one of the questions in Slido was about coming together and align. You just mentioned one way is bring them together physically. If they're remote or partially remote, we can still bring people together physically once we're all vaccinated. Anyone have any thoughts about how to build trust and align people? Traditionally done in a physical way in the remote environment. People seeing great things work there. David, is that you?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we, pre-COVID, every 6 months would have the whole team fly into a location, which changed every 6 months, where we would focus mainly on spending time together as humans more than working, which we felt was very helpful for us to then go back to our respective bases and then continue working together. Now, we were presented obviously with this challenge of, obviously, we're spending substantial budget and putting a lot of thought into this, and it had a rhythm for us. So we were asking ourselves, what do we do now? So we did some experimenting before we did a company level event. And what we've organized is, again, it's the same principle of what we talked about before. The key is not to try and replicate the physical gathering, but to ask ourselves, what are the goals and objectives, right? And then how do we just achieve the same thing with different tools, really? So what we've created now is instead a gathering event, right? So it's no longer obviously a meetup, but we still have dates that are assigned for us to pause from our typical work, to come together as an organization, to split out, to do interesting activities, to potentially invite people to speak. We do learning sessions, which we typically do in person. So we're still achieving the same goals and objectives, but again, just being thoughtful about what are those objectives and goals, and then how do you achieve them? And the key, as always, is think of your company as a product, right? Get feedback, improve, iterate, and just keep on going. We're now planning our second edition of this, which is happening in a month. So it's been quite effective, and the team have enjoyed it.
Great. Super interesting. We ran a similar thing in Miro. We got 400 people together, and we've got 12 hours time difference. So we had 3 hours overlap, and we just made that 5 days, 3 hours overlap of synchronous breakout rooms, discussions, co-creation. And it was our first time doing it, but the outcomes were much more similar to a physical meeting than we would have thought. So I think the technology is there to do meaningful collective experiences now, which is a big surprise for me. Probably you guys have been living that for a while. Alyssa, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that unfortunately, most of the remote team came together during COVID. So we never had a chance to meet in person, which is a bit unfair. I never met any of my coworkers in person, of course. But I think that, there's so many ways that companies can overcome that, right? So that you can kind of bridge the gap between the physical experience and the digital experience. And I think the emphasis needs to be on empathy, human connection, and inclusivity. And one of the ways that our team is doing that, we have a wonderful people team, is through the onboarding experience of new employees, right? That I've never met anyone. I hadn't even met anyone before joining the company. And so the first 2 weeks are remote are just like a wonderful guided introduction to the company, where everyone feels genuinely welcome and appreciated. And then we keep it up every day with team calls where the whole team responds to a question of the day. And it's kind of like an ongoing daily date with everyone in the company. And I probably now know more about them than about some of my close friends, even though we never met in person. So I think in our experience, remote onboarding has been more meaningful and faster than in-person onboarding, because every interaction has been very intentional and very purposeful.
Brienne, you have some experience in this area of employee onboarding and remote teams. Anything to add on that topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. My view of the world is very much early stage. And so it's typically teams doing the going from 0 to 100 employees. And so, in a lot of ways, there's been an immediate shift. Oftentimes, founders would move to Silicon Valley. You would maybe jump from one startup to another. You would then, like, the first, dozen employees would be people you've either previously worked with, individuals that you ran into by living really closely together in a really concentrated network like San Francisco. And so what's interesting today is, with talent globally distributed, and I would say distributed for a lot longer than anyone will anticipate. I spend a lot of time talking to engineers, product designers, individuals that have maybe even, spent the last 10 years in Silicon Valley, but, now that they're living somewhere else and they're enjoying a better cost of living or, enjoying more time with family, I just think there are a lot of changes and there's a lot of reevaluation that people are thinking about today. And so the one thing that I think about is, if anything, from a hiring standpoint, when it comes to finding your next position, I am seeing a shift where, if you're an engineer, open source contributions are up month over month and, year over year, where if you are more technical, starting to work on some side projects, starting to figure out what you want to do next, like just getting back into that builder mentality is something I'm seeing with individuals who were potentially engineering managers or mid-level managers. They're like, you know what, I'm sitting at home and I actually really just like building. And so I think there's a shift where people are going back to building. They're going back to, how they reallocate their free time, because if anything, we've killed the commute, we've removed a lot of meetings. And so it's just allowing people to get back to the basics of what they enjoyed doing before. And so I've seen this a lot specifically with remote cultures. I think Miro is a great example where, can you actually do hackathons or build days or ways for teams to get together and work more collaboratively on non-core projects or on things that are a little bit more experimental in nature, where companies can create an opportunity for individuals who are maybe even on different teams to actually collaborate and work together as part of building company culture. Because if anything, previously it was more, let's get together, let's have lunch, let's do a happy hour. Without that, I think coming up with culture events in the context of, what you're building or what you're thinking about. I'm seeing more companies do more frequent hackathons, more frequent build nights, and bringing people together in a way where you can actually get back to the basics. And, that also serves dual purpose, where you can also start to brush up on skills that maybe you haven't used for a while.
Great. Thank you. So we've got some great questions in the chat. Let's give people some functional advice here. But building on that idea of we've seen increased productivity, we're also seeing increased burnout. So Maulud, could you let us know how we can avoid the trap of living at work and burnout from this shift to remote phase?
I can definitely talk about that. So when COVID hit and we were all forced to work from home, I realized for the first time that I did not have a desk in my home. I've been working remotely for almost a decade, and I did not have a desk at home because I never ever worked from home. And then I was forced to create this corner of my apartment with this green screen behind me because my apartment is so super small, right? And then I had to learn how to live where I work and how to work where I live. Whereas before, even as a remote worker without going to an office, for me, the separation was absolutely clear. Now, working with a lot of clients, corporate clients who were suddenly remote, I realized that, as I said earlier, many of them filled the employees' calendars with meeting after meeting after meeting because they were craving to recreate that experience of serendipitously running into someone and having that conversation with them. And what happened as a result was that a lot of people working in these companies were creatives, they were developers, they were designers, they were people whose job is to sit down, allocate a big chunk of time in the calendar to their work, and create something at the end. While now their calendars were filled with meetings, so what ended up happening was that they extended their workday to either before everybody starts having meetings or after everybody has finished having meetings. And it became almost like going back to the old days of office where people hated going to the office because it was a distraction machine. So to avoid burnout, I want to emphasize once again, learn how to communicate effectively asynchronously so that you can respect people's freedom and you can give them the possibility to actually create during their work hours. That's the fundamental way of avoiding burnout. Otherwise, people will want to give their all to the work, so they will compensate after all those meeting hours.
Great.
And if I can add something small to this, if I may, because this really resonated with me, Maulud. And we actually had this experience at Hotjar as we scaled and grew. And another thing that complemented really well the async piece is we actually, which worked really well with it, was really well-defined ownership of who owns what. And then we emphasize a lot the term JOMO. So it's the opposite of FOMO. It's the joy of missing out. So again, you're going to burn out if you want to know everything, be involved in everything. And so this has really helped reduce a lot of that. But yeah, really resonated with me.
Great. So one of the top questions is on legal and taxes. So Alyssa, you spoke about benefits earlier. The question is, how does legal taxes topics affect remote work? And is this a big issue for remote teams that are located in different countries?
It's a massive issue. It's gigantic. So just for reference, before joining remote, I was, I built my own company, which started 3 years ago. And we currently still have teams in Italy and Spain. And I was based in San Francisco. And essentially, what I learned is that when I was at companies that had large budgets that we could throw at the problem, it was a very easy transaction. We would just hire an employer of record, which was usually very expensive, or we would build our own legal entity in another country just so that we could employ employees full-time in that country, which means also getting our own payroll providers, accountants, lawyers, and everything that you need to do in order to be compliantly paying taxes in one country and employing people full-time. As a small business, though, I didn't have the same budgets to be able to do all of this. Building my own legal entity in other countries is absolutely a nightmare and very expensive. And working with a traditional employer of record is just as expensive. And it was also hard to predict because there were so many hidden line items. And it was very hard to understand how much it would actually cost us. And so what we're doing at Remote and the way we're tackling this, we created a solution that works for teams of any size. Teams could be a team with 3 people that's just starting out, where the CTO wants to be in Milan and the CEO wants to be in San Francisco. Or large companies. We work with GitLab, which is the world's leading all-remote organization. And what we do, we essentially employ their employees on their behalf with full IP protection, invention of rights protection. And we take care of all of the complexities related to payroll, tax benefits, and compliance in every country, so they can focus on growing their team and just building a beautiful remote work culture.
All right. So the next one we have here is we'll go through a couple of these. Just raise your hand if you feel like jumping in on it. Extroverts on my team are finding remote work painful. Any suggestions to make remote work more personally engaging to help people feel really connected? I've heard this from some team members who just really genuinely miss each other, like an emotional miss. David.
Yeah.
So here I would make the distinction between normal distributed and COVID distributed, right? So a lot of people used to tell us at Hotjar, you guys are fine, right? Like you weren't affected by it. And we're like, of course we were affected by COVID. Just because we're remote doesn't mean we're robots connected to some mainframe or something. So at Hotjar, what we did was, this was a topic a couple of years ago that was important to us. So we used to do regular, every quarter, brainstorming sessions with the team. And we used async as well to populate before, where we'd ask them, what do you like about remote and what do you not like about remote? And the theme that kept on coming up was loneliness and not having that connection with people at work. So what we did was, to the point we discussed earlier about how you use your how you use your budgets and investment, we said, okay, at that point we were planning to have an HQ. We were thinking about it, and then we said, what the hell are we thinking? We're a distributed company, makes no sense. So we took that entire budget and we distributed it across the whole team, where they had a budget now to actually travel to meet each other, irrelevant of whoever you are. We call it the working together allowance. And again, you just pay for it through Hotjar and whatnot. On the back of that, we also introduced, like Malut was saying, a lot of people who joined Hotjar didn't have space at home where they could work. So we also allowed people in the company to use their credit card to go to a co-working space or to a cafe, right? So we'll happily pay for your coffee if it's giving you your Wi-Fi, right? So these things really, I wouldn't say solved the problem, but I'd say this created this environment of people planning trips and memories from the past, and we did that together in this photo, and this really worked. And then we also coupled it with do challenges every now and then. Go have a weekend break on Hotjar, but to get the money, you have to share what you did. So creating these moments of connecting, which are completely independent of your team, are very, very effective.
Any other thoughts on this topic, or a similar question on creating these serendipitous moments with looser connections? Like people looking to emulate the whole, I was just walking past your desk and I thought of something. What does that look like done?
I'll jump in. First thing, I'm very much in. So the one thing I'll say is it's okay to not feel okay. Even as an introvert, I feel like I've read all the books in my house. I bought a bunch of magazines. I'm kind of like all introverted out, and now I'm ready for the real world again as well. And so it's okay to not feel okay. The one thing that I will say, and something that I've noticed, I think there's an interesting moment in time where, in this period where a lot of people are at home, there's a lot of self-reflection. I think there's a lot of opportunity to reach out to people inside of your company that you haven't had a chance to meet yet. And so I think a lot of it is finding ways to be proactive and ways to use this extra time or this extended period of time at home to really build the network that you'd like for where you want to go next. And so I know there's a lot of different culture apps, like Donut is one that a lot of companies use on Slack, where maybe it's just introducing some of these serendipitous coffees that can happen over Slack inside of your company. I also have seen, there's a really interesting shift where, I think a lot can be said for learning from other peers and learning from other companies. And so maybe it's that extra initiative of, to what extent are you inviting external people to your company hackathons? To what extent are you maybe even starting a learning circle where if you're in a particular role or function, to what extent can you host a Zoom happy hour or bring people together remotely? I have an early stage VC fund called WorkLife. We mostly invest in tools for remote teams and enterprise SaaS. For us during COVID, it's been a really interesting time because we host a number of events throughout the week that are more peer circles. And so we'll get together a group of 15 or 20 product designers, or we'll get together. We did, in the middle of the summer, we did a head of people and culture event. And what's interesting is because things are changing so quickly, we're seeing 100% opt-in rate on all of our events. It doesn't matter what job title, it doesn't matter what company size. When you organize something and you bring people together, right now is an interesting time where people are seeking community. And so I think that knowledge sharing is really important. And so I do encourage, folks, especially sort of middle management or, folks that are, I would say, non-founders. I feel like founders actually have a really good ecosystem. When you're building a company, you inherently get to know other companies around the same size and stage. There's sort of that next level where if you are a startup employee, if you're a manager that's just kind of learning your own management style and how to do this fully remotely, I think reaching out to individuals at other companies, some of these knowledge circles can be a really helpful way to really grow professionally during this really strange time.
Well, that's a great segue. So I'd like to thank you, Alyssa, Maulud, David, Brianne. Thank you for opting in and joining this community. Thanks to everyone who's dialed in at Distributed. This has been a great panel. I've learned a lot. I know we've had a visual scribe recording some of the insights, so we'll pop that up at the end of this session and kind of reflect on some of the models shared. Thanks again for the perspective, the challenge, and the real deep wisdom. Of course, your time. We look forward to meeting you again on a Miro board, if not sooner. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone joining the Future of Remote.